Welcome back to Lift You Up Inspiring Health Stories. I'm your host, Tamika Bickham. I'm the founder and chief storyteller of TB Media Group. But for the purpose of this podcast, I am your health and happiness matchmaker. Now, before I introduce you to today's guest, you know what I'm going to ask you to do if you haven't already. Hit subscribe on YouTube, turn on those notifications, and connect with me on LinkedIn because I'd love to stay connected with you. Now, it is springtime, that time of year we tend to talk about maybe a little vacation, even a retreat. Well, we're talking about just that today, but wellness retreats that use plant medicine or psychedelics. It's an interesting topic I've wanted to learn more about as there's been more research coming out on its benefits when it comes to healing, growth, expansion, and spirituality. So that is what Jonathon de Potter is talking about today. He went from the corporate world to burnout and then going on his own 1-year sabbatical and now using what he's learned during that time and plant medicine to turn it into a whole new business helping others. Our physical, mental, and emotional health is not just a want. It is a need for happy lives and prosperous businesses. Lift You Up is the podcast where we share inspiring health stories from business owners who are fulfilling their purpose to live their healthiest lives and helping you do the same. From former TV reporter to marketing entrepreneur and content creator, I care about sharing stories that matter and stories that connect us. I'm your host, Tamika Bickham, your health and wellness matchmaker. Well, today I'm so excited to meet for the first time virtually and introduce everybody to Jonathon de Potter, who is the founder and CEO of Behold Retreats. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tamika. It's a real pleasure to be here.
So tell everyone where you're calling in from, where in the world you are right now.
Yeah, at the moment I'm in the south of Thailand, in a little island by the name of Koh Phangan, very kind of small and peaceful, conscious-oriented island. So it's been a great place to spend the last couple of years. Really,
really cool. So it's 10 o'clock in the night at night where you are, and 10 in the morning where I am. But it's awesome because we can be connected, across oceans and anyway, via Zoom and virtually. So glad to be chatting with you. Tell me a little bit about how you ended up in Thailand first before we dive into, your work and your company.
Yeah, so it all kind of ties together with the topic at hand. But yeah. In essence, I in 2017, I had lived and worked for 5 years in Hong Kong, which is a pretty fast-paced city. I lived there as a strategy and management consulting, in the corporate world for that duration, and I was working very hard. So at work most days by 7 a.m., finishing work by 10 p.m., even later than that, and chasing the modern dream. And so after 5 years in that grind of chasing the next client, chasing the next deal, chasing the next promotion, I just realized that in essence and ultimately there had to be more to life. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know where it was going to come from. And so as part of that, I decided to take a year off.
Going a sabbatical, I read in your bio.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to attend a life-changing retreat in Peru. And then subsequent to that, my priorities really shifted. So I did go back to the corporate world. And so that's what kind of was at the core of the motivation for the move to Thailand. So I really wanted to improve my patience, and I had the opportunity to establish a new office for a global consulting firm in Bangkok. So I moved there for a few years.
Okay, wait. All right, we got to go back for a second here. So 5 years on the grind. If you're like most of us or my listeners are here in the U.S., so if there's anything to compare that to, it would be like, working in New York at a, corporate type of job where you're putting in long hours. But it sounds like times 5 in Hong Kong.
Yeah, I mean, maybe not times five, but it was certainly full on. And also in another opportunity or another thing in Asia is that because there's a less mature workforce, often foreigners who move into Asia for career opportunities are given quite a bit of responsibility quite quickly, and so ended up leading quite large teams, and so it was a beautiful but also intensive learning curve during that time.
Oh wow, that's interesting. It's not something I ever thought about because I never worked there, but so there's a less mature workforce there. So they're, I guess, happy to have American workers over there to
Yeah,
kind of lead.
yeah, there's a lot of the global multinational, big corporations are obviously kind of headquartered or originated in the US. And so a lot of people tend to get kind of handpicked by the big multinational corporations and put into, leadership roles or management roles, and then given opportunities to move into leadership roles in kind of
Overseas.
foreign places, across
Oh.
Asia.
So that is ultimately what happened to you, and that was attractive to you at the time.
I actually had two of my mentors left the company that we were working at together in New Zealand. And so they were given, quite sizable opportunities. And so I followed them in exploring consulting and also Hong Kong.
Awesome. Okay, so you're doing this for 5 years or so, it sounds like. You get burnt out on that experience, and you decided to go, from what I read in your bio, on a 1 year sabbatical.
That's right. So I decided I'd never been to South America at the time, and so I spent, the first 6 weeks of that year just hiking in the south of Patagonia, beautiful mountains, etc. And
Mm.
then was working my way north through South America. And during that time, a couple friends came and joined me, and we went to a retreat in Peru, which was my first ayahuasca retreat, which was very challenging, but also eye-opening and opened the door to spirituality for me as well.
I'm so interested by what you're doing now because it sounds like it was totally fueled by this 1 year you had to kind of take it and go on this experience. Like, what led you to find those things?
Yeah. So I guess I just remember during that time that I just felt in the core of my being that I knew there had to be something more to life. I was actually an atheist at the time, so I wasn't spiritual. Come from very hippie parents, very open-minded parents, but I kind of went in the other direction. And so I just wanted something new, something novel that I hadn't done before, and I heard really good things about the beauty of nature in South America in particular, and so that really attracted me. And I wanted it to be an adventure. I didn't really have anything too specific in mind. I was more curious and motivated to establish a bit of an opening, a bit of a void, if you will, in my life to see what would naturally come into that space. So the first 6 months of that was travel. Then I wound up at this retreat, as I mentioned before, which was, certainly
You mentioned
represents.
difficult.
Yes, very difficult, but a pivotal moment. And then from there it was, also kind of deciding what's next in terms of, do I return to the corporate world, or what do I do with my life? And so I spent about 3.5 years that followed doing my own work and understanding the depths of this work before moving into it from a more professional perspective.
Hmm. So, for those who aren't familiar with an ayahuasca retreat, what is it?
Yeah, so ayahuasca is ancient medicine from Central and South America. There are many different traditions, indigenous traditions that work with the medicine. And so ayahuasca itself is the combination of two plants. Confusingly, one of them is ayahuasca, the other one is chacruna, and then it's often mixed with other plants as well. But in essence, it's made of these two plants, and it's a very powerful medicine. It reconnects mind, body, heart, and spirit in the ways that they should be. connected, and it also has very powerful neurogenerative effects. So what that means is that it facilitates the growth of new neurons, and it also has strong neuroplasticity effects, which is to say that it reconnects parts of the brain that normally do not exchange information. So if you look at your typical Westerner's brain, what you see is something that's actually highly compartmentalized. So that's to say that all regions of the brain are not interconnected in the ways that we would like to see in a fully functioning, healthy brain. And that there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one is intergenerational trauma, right? We're often passing trauma down through generations, and or we've had traumatic experiences early in our lives. Some of us may remember some of those experiences. Others may have had those experiences but not be able to recall them, so they've actually been kind of hidden away from our own everyday waking consciousness. And so this medicine helps us to reaccess and to be able to process and ultimately release some of these lower level traumas that may have impacted our development. And so these medicines provide us, greater access to our subconscious to be able to release out these lower level emotions and to improve the quality of everyday experience.
So you mentioned that there's a few reasons why Westerners' brains in particular are more compartmentalized, and that intergenerational trauma is one of them. What are some of the others?
The others would be overthinking. So there's some great science from the National Science Foundation that shows that your typical person has between 12,000 and 60,000 thoughts per day. Virtually all of those thoughts are egoic thoughts. So they're I, me, my. 95% of those thoughts are repetitive, and 85% of those thoughts are negative. So we think a lot only about ourselves, the same things, and mostly bad things. And so that's the second piece that, when we work with our clients, we try to really help them understand their negative patterns of mind. And through this work and, the benefits that I mentioned before in terms of neurogeneration and neuroplasticity, we can actually, work on rerouting the patterns of minds. And then the third thing I would say is overwhelm. Right. So I think we all have these days, our brains didn't quite evolve to deal with the level of complexity that each of us is faced with on a daily basis, in terms of just the sheer amount of choice that we're faced with. Right. We've all got 1,001 things to do for work. We have, personal responsibilities. We've got family. We've got so many things that we're juggling in our minds. The brain starts to become a little bit patterned and deterministic. Right. So we can't possibly meet the complexity of the outside world on its terms. And so what the brain starts to do is it starts to simplify things down. And so while that sounds like, a positive adaptive response to manage the complexity, it's compartmentalizing, as we spoke before. And so sometimes the example I give is, we all know someone in our lives that if we were to present them some new information, we already know how they're going to respond to that information. That's the example of what we're talking about. They've actually, the way in which new information travels through their brain is already determined. So they've actually lost the function of the brain itself, if that's the case.
Okay. You're blowing my mind right now. This is really interesting. Like, the way you're breaking this down is in a way that I've never heard before, or I maybe just haven't gotten as deep with it. And so compartmentalization is bad, right?
It is.
Okay.
It is. And this is, if I one example that I sometimes give is, in the modern paradigm, you've got, a guy who says, I love my wife. And on the other hand, he's cheating on his wife. Now, what that's an example of is two thoughts that are incongruent with one another, right? Those are two things that shouldn't be part of a single thought mechanism, and yet it is, and it is actually not entirely uncommon. And I give that as just one example of incongruent thoughts that actually can sit within a single consciousness. And so these are two thoughts that are actually stored in different parts of the brain. And so typically when people have an experience such as this, and everything is being unified in consciousness, then these sorts of inconsistencies need to be reconciled, because you're being inconsistent with yourself, and that's only going to cost you ultimately, when you're not being in alignment with self.
So is that because they're not connected, or like you mentioned the neural pathways, like, and is that what it it is?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I think you could look at it at the level of the physical, or the level of the kind of the software of the brain. And in essence, there's, I guess, through this experience, there's this unification across the mind that's taking place. And so people can commonly have powerful realizations in relation to childhood trauma, in relation to inconsistencies, in relation to opportunities to improve quality of life. Because these medicines, fundamentally what they're doing is they are harmonizing our mind, body, heart, and spirit to a single vibration, right? That's really what we're trying to do. And as the medicines are working, then it's amplifying any lower level energies, lower level vibrations, right? So that could be any of the emotions that I rattled off before. And so that's our opportunity to process these lower level emotions,
Gotcha.
and to release them out from our energetic and physical body. And so when that's being done, then the medicine is bringing us up into a higher and higher vibration.
You mentioned specifically Westerners.
Mm-hmm.
Are our brains different from others?
Yeah, so it is as part of this research that showed, so it showed actually two photos. On one side, it showed a circle, when on the outside of the circle was representing all the different individual regions of the brain, and then there was these lines that were interconnecting the different parts from the outsides of the circle. And what you could see was that there was a few regions that were connecting and communicating very well with a few other regions of the brain, but most of the inside of the circle was completely white. And now if you contrasted that with the next circle, which was showing the brain under the effect of psilocybin, and this was an MRI scan, it showed a much higher degree of interconnectivity. So many more regions of the brain were able to directly communicate with many more other regions of the brain. They also did the same scan on a Buddhist monk and someone who had 20 years meditation practice. Now the Buddhist monk, his brain looked much more like the Westerner's brain under the effect of psilocybin than it did your typical Westerner's brain, if that makes sense. So, I think, and that's true, that's obviously true, regardless of whether we're talking about Westerners or people in Asia or from any part of the world. If they've got a 20 or 30 year meditation practice, then the brain is very healthy. If you're living in a city and, you've got a super busy schedule and you're running around all day, it's very likely that you've got a high degree of compartmentalization and, suboptimal use of your neural pathways and ultimately your brain.
See, this is so helpful and useful because I think people say I should do yoga or I need to meditate, or these people don't understand why. And like hearing you explain it in this way, as far as the compartmentalized parts of the brain, and whether it's plant medicine or meditation, or I'm sure there's, other things that we could include in that list that would benefit you, and the why and how it impacts the brain is, I think, sometimes the thing that's left out of the conversation. And it's helpful for me to hear that, because I think, those of us who, we want to understand why, what are the answers? Like, I don't want to just do a thing because people say I should do a thing and it's going to help me feel better.
Yeah, absolutely. The other reasons I would throw in there would be, number one, being able to connect more deeply with your higher self, the elevation of consciousness, right? So whether that's through breath work, meditation, plant medicine, and then the other thing is developing a deeper mind-body connection. And I think health is so energetic in its nature, and that when we eat the right food and do the yoga and take care of our bodies, then we can really improve the vibration in our physical bodies. And not only that, there's such a deeper connection that is able to form between mind and body. Our intuition comes very much from our heart. And so, to some degree we understand this, and some degree we can tap into it, but actually tapping into that consciously versus it just happening, here and there when things are important, is very different. And so, it's for a lot of people, developing that felt sense of intuition is also something that can provide a lot of benefits to quality of life.
Okay, so it sounds like you've gone through a lot of personal change over the last 5 years that has impacted all areas of your life. Tell me what happened after this 1 year sabbatical, which I believe ended with the ayahuasca retreat. And I know you went back, I think you mentioned you went back to corporate America, but what eventually led you to saying goodbye to that, starting your own business, and what did the rest of that path look like?
Yeah, so actually, that first retreat, I actually had a very challenging experience. I wasn't prepared for the experience. For me personally, it was very challenging physically. So, I like to educate, so I'm going to give the full rundown. I probably threw up about 150 times in the first ceremony. So it was very physically challenging for me. I passed out probably close to 10 times. And fundamentally, the brain was trying to reconnect to some early childhood traumas. I consider myself a pretty lucky person, very loving, protective parents, but there were some things there that happened at age 4, age 5 that were very traumatizing. And so the brain was trying to protect itself from reconnecting and reliving that experience. So that's why I was kind of passing out. And so this is, part of my motivation for establishing Behold Retreats is very much because I recognize that people can be much better prepared for these experiences, much better guided and facilitated during, the depths of what can be, your most challenging and honestly your most vulnerable hour in doing this work. And so, the other aspect was that, they were loving people, but they just didn't quite have the skills that were required in terms of the mental and the emotional. And now I recognize some of the spiritual and energetic work as well. And so I did, the first night was very challenging. The second ceremony, I got, more out of the work. And so I did end up leaving the retreat feeling like, I had received some benefits, but then I wasn't guided in the integration, right? So there was no help post-retreat. I was just kind of put out the door, and I had these massive, life-changing experiences. And so, I went back to the corporate world because I knew I wasn't ready to jump into this professionally. I had to understand more. And so, when I had this opportunity to establish, a new office in Bangkok, I thought, okay, that might be a good kind of intermediary step. And so, during that duration, it was very much a period of, I would say, decoupling my personal identity from my work identity. Before that, my work identity and my personal identity were so intertwined. So there was this period of kind of decoupling. And then as I moved into this work about 2 years ago now, then there was this kind of rejoining, right? So where the real sense of, personal and identity and career identity, purpose came back together and remerged. So that's been a very interesting and also beautiful process over the past 24 months or so.
I love that. Only 24 months, like this has been a lot of change that's happened quickly.
Yeah. So it's been good fun establishing, the retreats and guiding clients. We've been very blessed thus far.
So tell me about Behold Retreats, exactly what you do, and kind of get into the nitty gritty of how it works.
Yeah, sure. So with most of our clients, we guide them through a 7-week process, and that includes a 1-week plant medicine retreat. We also do just plant medicine retreats, but for most of our clients, we help them get prepared for 3 weeks from home. Then it's a 1-week retreat, and then they go and we guide them in the 3 weeks as they reintegrate back into, normal daily life. And so for the 3 weeks prior, what we typically do is help our clients get them really clear on future self. These medicines respond to intentionality. So the more deeply we anchor around a understanding of our future self, expectations and hopes and dreams for our future self, then the medicine can show us what needs to be true in order to be able to achieve those things. And then we work with our clients to help them surface the mental and emotional blind spots, right? So what are the patterns of mind that are keeping you from that future self today? And what are some of the emotions that you're experiencing? What are your triggers? What's going on in your daily life, your relationships, your relationship to self and other? And then we begin to, either depending upon their needs, a coach or a therapist will begin to work with them on a weekly basis to help them work through these things in preparation for the work with the plant medicine. So hopefully when that's done well, people go into that experience really understanding what they're trying to rewire in their brain and what they're trying to release from their physical and energetic body. We work predominantly with three medicines, either psilocybin, which is kind of magic mushrooms, ayahuasca, or 5-MeO DMT, which is the toad you may have heard of. It's generally recognized as even 4 to 6 times more powerful than ayahuasca. We would do something like 2 to 4 ceremonies over the course of a week, which is quite a bit of work. And then post retreat, we would help them integrate the experience. So, what is it you're going to do differently in everyday life? How is this going to change how you care for yourself? How is this going to change how you relate to others? How is this going to change, how you show up at work? Do you still want to do the same things? All of these sorts of questions. And so then we also help clients, re-anchor around future self, and then we teach them tools for manifestation. So how is it that you are no longer going to do the hustle and grind on the outside, but actually attract what you want into your life from the inside and reach the vibrational state of the things that you are looking to manifest into your experience?
So who is this right for?
So a lot of our clients, I would say, are professionals, but generally speaking, people come with 3 types of motivations. One is healing, right? So when we know that there's trauma and stuff, overwhelm and stress. And the second, I would say, would just be growth or expansion, right? And so we get a lot of clients that are often in a period of transition. Maybe, their career is no longer giving them the joy that it once did. Maybe they've just had a divorce. And so they're kind of entering a new chapter, or, maybe they're not able to attract the right partner into their lives. And so they're trying to understand, more deeply what it is that they need to change about themselves to be able to attract more love into their lives. And then the third is more spiritual. So people who really want to expand their consciousness and go deeper in terms of their spiritual exploration.
How does it help high-powered, professional individuals?
Yeah, sure. Well, the place I would start to answer this question is actually that there's an interesting dynamic that I believe is playing out in the world, which is the most successful people, they require external validation in order to be made to feel whole, right? So there's this feeling of like, I'm not good enough. And a lot of people have that kind of sitting within them, that I'm not good enough. And so when that's happening, we're coming from a wounded place, and then we're pushing ourselves out there into the world to prove to ourselves that we are good enough from external validation. And so, these are the people who end up as CEOs of big organizations are the people who have pushed themselves the hardest. They are the ones that require the most external validation, likely through school, through university, early in their career. And then that's what's ultimately led them to push themselves harder than others to be able to achieve these massive things, because they're just disconnected from themselves. And so often these can be the most challenging clients in terms of what they need to go through in order to reconnect with some of these things. And so, while my experience would, I think, be on the spectrum of more challenging, it's very common for those people who have had very prolific, successful careers to have more challenging experiences, because they're very contracted and sometimes even very controlling in the way in which they're seeing things. And so there's a lot of work to be done to be able to help them release that control, which is very, very central and fundamental to this work.
So what about those who might hear this and they're familiar with psilocybin and ayahuasca and DMT you mentioned, and say, well, this sounds like drugs?
We have evidence of ancient wisdom traditions using sacrament, plant medicine sacraments from virtually every continent in the globe. And so it was actually colonial forces, through history that actually sought to wipe out these traditions. So when we hear about, wiping out the shamans or the witches or, some of the cultural elements of these indigenous cultures around the world, I believe these medicines are neutral. It's not that they're positive, it's not that they're negative. What I say to some of our clients is, look at any psychedelic community, and what you'll probably find is that it's not necessarily an example of the energy that you might like to reflect in your everyday life. So it's not that plant medicines or psychedelics are inherently positive. They're a very powerful tool that, when we have the right intentionality and the right facilitation and expertise around them, it's a very powerful tool for transformation.
What is something that you'd want, if there's one takeaway for somebody listening to this about behold retreats or plant medicines, what's one thing that you feel like most people don't know and you would really want them to ultimately take away?
Yeah, I'm going to share something that's a little bit far out there, but why not? Let's swing for the fences.
Let's do it.
So through this work, what does become available is to recognize that the outside world, reality as we know it, isn't really actually real. It's all a byproduct of mind, and I think we live in such an interesting time because I think we are finally coming to recognize that our fellow humans, some of them are seeing the world very differently than we are. And that's okay, right? Because the universe is being created through our minds. And so there is just a single matrix of consciousness, which is, in essence, what the Matrix, the film, is referring to. There's a matrix of consciousness, and our minds are a modulator for this matrix of consciousness, this hologram of consciousness. And so it's just a modulation device for a single set of information. So each of us has an individuated filter for what the world is. But actually, there is this unification that is available. When we talk about non-duality, when we talk about, we are all one, those are references to this understanding, this higher recognition, this universal truth that it's actually just one source of consciousness that is individuating and potentializing in each of us and as individuals. And our job here, whether it's through meditation, through plant medicine, through other contemplative practices, is to develop ourselves spiritually. And to do so, we need to find the time and the motivation to give primacy to the inner world, right? And that we can create whatever we want through the inner world rather than paying attention to our senses, right? We've got all these beautiful, amazing senses that lend us to prioritize what's going on in the outside world. But that's the trick, that's the distraction. And so it's all in here. And so the moment that we look for the source of consciousness and begin to ask the more difficult questions of who am I, what am I, where am I, when am I, these are when people are able to recognize more interesting things about the nature of the universe and ultimately themselves.
So someone's listening to this, and maybe I'm one of those people, and they're not quite ready for a plant medicine experience. I guess, what would you say but someone who's curious, right? Like, I'm hearing what you're saying, want to learn more. I usually ask for like a health tip or a wellness tip that, my guests either incorporate in their lives or something that is kind of actionable and people could kind of implement right away that would maybe just benefit them in their day-to-day. So maybe I'm kind of tying in that question with this question as far as what would be kind of the right path if those questions are coming up for someone, but they're not necessarily, ready to dive into the retreat quite yet.
Yeah, I would encourage people to look into breath work and meditation. Breath work to activate the mind, body, heart, and spirit in the ways that they can be. And then that's a really nice way to settle into a meditation and to have, a better chance at some deeper breakthroughs during that meditation once you've done some of that breath work. So that would be very much where I would encourage people to, spend 30 or 40 minutes each day. And, if you do that consistently for a month, and that doesn't massively improve your quality of life, I would be very surprised.
Wow. 30 to 45 minutes a day. We're diving in, right? Going all for it.
Absolutely.
Can't start with 5 or 10.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can do 10 minutes. There's definitely benefits to 10 minutes. But look, I always say to people, like, we die alone, and we can't take the money with us, right? So it's the spiritual stuff that's going to matter. And so giving some, lending some respect and some primacy to that work is something that I never could have believed myself saying 5 years ago. But that's the trick to life. I truly believe that.
That's awesome. I love that. Tell everyone how they can learn more about Behold Retreats, connect with you, website, social media, all the good stuff.
Yeah, you can come and have a chat with us at www.behold-retreats.com. There's no book now button on our website. You have to speak to a real human, which I know is a little bit old school, but we like to get to know our clients and make sure that there's a mutual fit there. We try to make sure that we're inviting those people that are ready for this work, and that we're the best suited to help. So if that's not the case, then we'll likely make some other recommendations for you. And you can also find us on Instagram at behold_retreats.
Awesome. I love that. Is there anything else, Jonathan, that you wanted to add that I didn't ask you?
No, it's been great, Tamika. You've asked great questions, and really enjoyed our conversation.
Oh, thank you. No, this has been great. Honestly, I learned a lot, which is what I always at least aim for. And you taught me something new and something I'm definitely interested in learning more about, and happy to help spread the word. So thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you.
I'm curious to know what you thought of that episode. So I'll tell you more about how you can let me know in just a minute. But maybe you want to connect with Jonathan, connect more with him, learn from him, do your own research on the subject matter. Just read more below in our show notes. I hope you enjoyed it and at least expanded your mind, your way of thinking, and opened your eyes to maybe something new, or maybe not. Who knows? Anyways, Jonathan's information is all down below. So is mine. So make sure to connect with me. I'd love for you to reach out on LinkedIn, even here on the website, shoot me an email, or leave a review on Apple Podcasts. I'd love to hear what you think of this episode and what you want to hear more of coming up, because we come back each and every week. So find me on YouTube, find me on LinkedIn. I'm all the places. Again, you can find that below. I'd hate for you to miss out, because we come back with new episodes each and every week. So until I see you back next week, because I know I'll see you then, stay happy, stay healthy.